Okay, we are now live here. I want to thank everyone. This is going to be an exciting show today. We're going to be talking about the prosecution of Roger Ver, or is it Ver? I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced, but we'll get to that. And this is fascinating because I have with me Taylor Hudak, a journalist of the Slaw Report. She has published a scathing report on the federal government about what they did in this case, and it lines up with a lot of things that I know and my own stories. And along with us today is, by the way, I'm Anthony Parent of IRS Medic. Thanks so much for joining us today. Also with me is my longtime friend and the great John Richardson, who's helped as well Taylor understand the issues in the background between expatriation and some of these cases, so that the people can understand what the government is really doing, why these charges are being brought. So with that, Taylor, welcome to the show. And I guess this is what I want to just start off with you. What got you interested in this? It's fantastic. And John and I are so happy because we're generally older folk and maybe people aren't so interested in what we have to say. So what inspired you to get interested into this case?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I just want to say I first came across you guys as I was doing my research on this report. So to backtrack a little bit, I tend to cover a lot of court cases. I covered the Assange case since those extradition proceedings began back in 2020. Of course, the case is now closed and it ended with a plea deal. And then I also covered another case out of Germany regarding a doctor who was critical of the certain medical products. I want to be careful with my language here so we don't get banned, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, yep.
So I tend to cover a lot of court cases, and then I just decided to take this one up. It seemed like it was a pretty serious case, and I decided to create sort of a lengthy timeline of it, extensive timeline. And then I realized, wow, there are so many other issues on the periphery here with expatriation law, with the tax law. So I was actually, as I mentioned earlier, just going through my research, and I thought I really need like a good legal analysis of this case. So I literally put into YouTube like Roger Ver, like legal analysis or something like that. And then both of you guys popped up. And then I became more familiar with, wow, okay, this expatriation process is actually quite complex. This entire tax issue is also very complex as well. I'm going to reach out, I listened to you guys, and then I decided to reach out to both of you to kind of get a better sense of what exactly was going on here, how the tax system works, how the expatriation process works. I learned so much. I hope the readers, the listeners will also learn a lot from this report, because these are things that most Americans aren't aware of. Really. So
and you're in Hungary yourself right now, but you're an American. So were you blown away? Sort of, this can't be right, or
I think I knew a little bit more about the tax system in the United States, probably more than most people. If you've never left the United States, you wouldn't know about this, or you may not know about this citizenship-based taxation. So I was familiar with it, but I did not know the extent of it. And I also was pretty unfamiliar with the expatriation process as well. And I think I got a better grip on it now. Of course, we got an expert here, John, who knows all about it and was so helpful in my research and understanding this. So I'm actually grateful to both of you guys for talking about it, because I was listening to your conversations and presentations as part of my research for this report. And just for the listeners, so they're aware, this report, you can find it on Solari.com.
And I did put the link in the super chat for everyone if they want to go find that, and we'll be doing a screen share of it in a little bit to go over that. Thank you so much, John. I want to turn over to you. So I guess, why did we waste our time talking about cases like Rogers? Why is it so important for us to do this, and why is it important to you? Why do you agree to go on my show to do this? I guess that's my question for you. What's important?
Well, first of all, I get up early, Anthony. Okay, so it's not that big of an issue. It's not even often the start of my day. It's sort of midday. But well, I think that to some extent, Anthony, the answer comes from something that came out of our podcast yesterday, which was, it finally hit me. All right, that until the income tax goes away, until there's more scrutiny to taxation and stuff, basically the freedoms of Americans and all people are going to continue to be eroded to the point where they have no freedoms left. So, I mean, this is a broad, I don't know. Boy, actually, I've never even met Anthony in real life, by the way, after all these years of talk. So
and I'm like, we didn't meet in DC. I'm like, I don't think I actually met you. I know. And I'm like, I don't want to say that, but I don't think we actually.
No, I think that's actually right. So I'm not sure, what his impression of me actually is. But I mean, but I see this stuff, and really in much, much broader sort of sociological terms. And this language of exit taxes and this, that, and the other thing is, I mean, sure, in a professional capacity, you talk about this, but, we are really looking at, and yes, I'm going to be very, very clear on this. We are looking at the complete eradication of human freedom if we don't get this stuff under control as a society. And, this Roger, I'll call him Roger V, because I don't know how to pronounce his name either.
Yeah, how do you know? Can we pronounce this? Can somebody help us out here?
I've been saying Ver.
Ver. That's what I've been saying too. All right.
Roger.
I heard someone say Ver. Or maybe Roger.
I say Ver. I'm actually, I don't know for sure, but that's
all right. We're together then. We're in agreement.
Okay.
So, all right.
Well, obviously, at least it's fairly obvious to me that the fact that there's an extradition issue, the only other area where I'm aware of an extradition over these kinds of issues was, I can't even remember the name, but a Russian naturalized citizen, U.S. citizen, who expatriated, and he set up an online bank or something, and it was the same sort of issue. At least in terms of the government allegations. And eventually that was settled. All right. Perhaps it was settled because the man was or is, I guess, extremely ill. But it seems to me, that given that these are on the most basic level tax cases, to start incorporating extradition proceedings into tax cases, particularly in areas that, I mean, I know very, very few people who understand this stuff. I mean, very, very few. And I don't know who the lawyers are, I don't know any of these people personally, but
I think the national here was Oleg Tinkoff, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Tinkoff.
Yeah,
right.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Patience is Alpha.
And I actually met his lawyer once at a conference. Interestingly, that's just a comment. I mean, I didn't get any particular insight out of it, but I did actually meet his lawyer once. So I mean, these are big issues. When you start. I mean, they're big as standalone issues, but boy, where you start, getting extradition in other countries, involved in this type of stuff. I mean, how could anybody say that the end result, even if this isn't intentional, right? How can anybody say that the end game here isn't the total eradication of human freedom? I mean, taxation is important. I'm not an anti-tax guy, by the way. I think taxes are necessary. But the way that this is unfolding, has got to come to an end. And I think that Mr. Ver's case, I think, illuminates that. Now, they'll try very hard to portray this guy as some kind of enemy of the people, tax cheat or something, but they will not succeed, because, their arguments are far more far-fetched than, anything that this guy has ever done or not done, that's for sure.
Thank you very much, John. And I would say this, that there is an extradition treaty. When the income taxes were originally passed back in 1913, because there's always a little promise. Oh, it's just going to be a little tax, a little bit. And originally, when it was passed in 1913, tax evasion was a misdemeanor, so it wouldn't be extraditable. But that's the way government creeps work, by creeping. And speaking of government creeps, this is actually where I want to head to your article. We're going to start at the beginning. But the part of your article that jumped out at me, Taylor, where I said, oh my God, I didn't know that. The part that was most critical was really in 2000. So we're going to go to this right here. And this is the part, because I have a personal story I want to share of a phone call I have. It's this right here, where you had this jumped out to me to say, oh my God, no, there's no question There's no question why Roger is being prosecuted in my case, because I happen to know some other stories, and I'll share that in a little bit. But really, here's the thing that got him. That in the fall of 2000, as part of his campaign, when he ran for California State Assembly, isn't that something, right? Verri participated in a San Jose State University. My brother's a professor there, by the way. Way to go! Right? Against the Republican and Democrat candidates. During debate, Verri criticizes the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for killing children in the Waco, Texas siege, April 1993. I didn't need to read anything more, and I'll tell you why. Because I think the year was about 2017 or 18. I received a call from an attorney. I do a lot of tax resolution work, a lot of tough cases. I got a call from a guy. Hey, what's going on here? Yeah, I'm a fellow attorney. And he told me his story. He's like, well, I was charged with tax evasion. I'm like, okay. And he goes, I don't know what to do about this restitution. It's a $2 million restitution. Is there any way I could settle this? And I told him, I said, no, unfortunately, it's a separate collection mechanism. It's not your civil. It's a thing. It's not enforced. I went through the whole thing. I said, the only way to challenge that order of restitution is to open the case and file a motion to reduce it. He goes, oh, no. I don't want to do that. I said, oh, okay, you don't want to reopen the case? No. I said, well, why is that? He goes, well, you got to understand why this happened. I said, why did it happen? He goes, well, I'm an attorney. I'm a personal injury attorney. I'm in New York. I am a Democrat. And my clients were deceased children of Waco. And I was suing the federal government for intentionally murdering these people by, doing what they did. And he said, the government didn't like that. The Clintons really didn't like that. So what they did is they had the Southern District of New York invent phony charges against him. And he looked at it. He goes, I can't beat this. There's no way I can beat this. And by the way, if I beat this, I might be I might be suicided, is basically what he said. So this is where this is. And so I said, all right, well, good luck with this. I can't help you without opening the case. He goes, okay, all right, well, just good to know. I don't know what I'm going to do. So there is an attorney ruined because he dared challenge and dared criticize the federal government over its murderous rampage in Waco, which is 100% true. So when I see that, and then the retaliation, of course, they retaliated immediately against Roger, which I didn't realize. They have a pattern of warfare against him, for crying out loud. They filed a criminal complaint against him for selling Pest Control Report 2000 without a license, and it was a type of firework used to scare birds out of their fields. Of course, I think there's so many felonies in the U.S. Code. You can indict anybody for anything, and that's really the trick the government has. You can indict anybody for anything. Find the man, find the crime, right? And that's what they did. They found the man. We don't like this guy. We found the crime. They stuck it with him. He seems to be the only person charged with this crime. So that, I think, Taylor, is the background. When you understand this government does not want criticism over its actions. When it does something terrible, which is incredibly often, it doesn't want criticism. And if you are vocal and if you have a point in pointing that out, they're really mad. Maybe there'll be some retaliation against me. Maybe, I don't know. But that's really where I think it is, and that is what I found the most nauseating, but realistic. Like, here's the explanation in my mind why it's happening right there, because you criticize this government, and this government is the enemy of the American people. It's very clear to that. So that is my insight to that. Now, Taylor, does this surprise you in any way that the government would do such a thing?
No, and I actually first came across this through the documentary Bitcoin Jesus. It's a 20-minute documentary. This is discussed. I actually pull some quotes from that documentary in this section of the report. And this really piqued my interest because I thought, wow, perhaps there really was a threat even at such a young age to the establishment. Yes. I did wonder, it is a little bit risky to pursue charges against him. And I think, John, you mentioned this when we were talking about this case. You kind of make a folk hero out of someone like Verri when you do things like this. But they were clearly upset about what he had said. I did try to see if there was any sort of record of this debate. I would have loved to have been able to pull that for the report. It would have been so interesting. But of course, this was in 2000. So cameras, and we didn't film things back then like we do today. So I didn't search all that hard for it. Of course, the report, I had to focus on other things, but I couldn't find any record of that debate. There were photos, though, in this documentary. But I, in fact, was just generally curious about this case here, because typically, from what I understand, anybody who is selling something like the PCR 2000, which is commonly used by farmers, if you were selling it without a license, which from what I understand at that time, many people and many corporations were doing so, they did not have a license. However, it was only Vaer who was being prosecuted for this. Typically, instead of going to prison, the person would be fined and they would be told, get a license. Instead, they imposed quite a severe sentence on him, I thought. And just to maintain some balance, I did reach out to the ATF agent who filed the complaint against him. And that was actually really interesting for me. I went back and forth in my head. Do I want to reach out? Do I not want to reach out? I decided to do so because I found that this ATF agent, Micah Wellman, is no longer with the ATF. And he had some sort of, I hope I am correct here, but it appears that he had some sort of falling out with the ATF, let's say, where they investigated him for something. I don't think it's related to this case because this was in the state of Nevada, but he had some sort of falling out with the ATF. I thought perhaps there could be a chance where he is willing to share a little bit more with me than he otherwise would if he was still with the ATF. However, you could look at part of our discussion, which I released, and you could see that it seems to me he doesn't care for Vaer very much. He felt that this was a serious crime that deserved punishment. Another interesting note was that this ATF agent was very young at the time. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. So they put a new young ATF agent on this case, somebody, in my opinion, who would be far more likely to pursue a lower level case than, say, a more seasoned ATF agent. So this guy said that he just joined the ATF. He was enthusiastic about the job and really wanted to show himself as a strong, sort of ATF agent who was willing to tackle crime. So I think that that's an interesting element to this as well. I did include in that second to last paragraph where he had some not so nice things to say about Vaer. And he also mentioned himself the libertarian views that Vaer held and still has. So I thought it was important to highlight that. I did not mention the libertarian views. Vaer is claiming that this was a political prosecution and that they were targeting him for these libertarian views, for his candidacy with the California State Assembly. So I thought it was interesting that ATF agent mentioned that first. So it does seem like that was, in fact, a prominent aspect of the case. Yes, you highlighted right there. He mentioned the AC Ford Cobra. I thought that was interesting that he would remember that. But I do also want to say that ATF agent did not have to respond to me. And I'm very grateful that he took the time to speak with me. I do want to be polite and thankful that he was willing to even respond to my questions. He did not have to, and he shared a lot of information. And that's great. I think it's important for me to get all the facts, present it to the public, and then let everybody decide what they think of these matters.
So one thing that strikes me listening to you talk about this is that Mr. Vaer at this point, he's like 20 years old, isn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
Just pause and think about this for a minute, okay? Yeah. So, it's bad enough to, propose a carceral solution, that is lock him up.
Right.
For this period, it's out of proportion. But to do this to a 20-year-old is, I think magnifies this significantly. It's very, very clear that what happened, but, regardless of, where you are on the political spectrum or anything else,
right.
This seems to be an objective truth, that it's very, very clear that at this point, Mr. Vaer is a young man who was dealt with very harshly and disproportionately harshly. And, why, we don't know, but I think that fact should be duly noted.
Yes. And if you look at the indictment, just an interesting bit of information, you'll see that at that time in 2000, 2001, Robert Mueller was the attorney general for the Northern District of California. So, these people that are super corrupt, they're willing to oversee corrupt cases. They work their way up to the top. So it was very interesting to see him listed on the indictment.
Yeah, and Robert Mueller was involved in Boston. That terrible. I mean, there was
Oh,
the movie The Departed, which changes little facts here to make the government not look as terrible as it is. I mean, that
mhm.
movie does seem to polish up the federal government, because what he did there was really something else. And so, I mean, I think it's like you are seeing the same players in this. Robert Mueller doing what he does. Like, hey, look, we are on the government, we are on team federal government, and we'll ruin anyone who challenges our power. I do want to I want to go over to the beginning of your article. We'll start at the beginning now, because there's a great quote here. And I think this really, here it is. Again, there's the link in the super chat, and I think it's also in the description as well. The prosecution of Roger Ver Lawfare case study. That's 100% right. And this is the quote you started with from Tucker Carlson. This lawfare isn't really about taxes. It's about control. Vera has long challenged both permanent Washington and centralized finance. They see him as a threat. That is actually what Tucker said about the tax system is exactly that. It's actually not about raising revenue. The IRS really doesn't care about raising revenue. The federal government gets all the money it needs from the Federal Reserve. The job of the IRS is to destroy excess dollars so that hyperinflation doesn't occur. So the IRS actually masquerades as a revenue-raising agency. That's actually not its due. What its job is to control you. It is to control you every which way. That's why the tax code is so complicated, because you're not meant to understand it. And I think one thing I point out to people constantly, that anyone defending this thing, look, our education system has degraded so much over the last 40 years since the Department of Education was established in 1979. It has degraded so much that right now the average reading comprehension of an adult in America, someone over 18 years old, is the 6th grade level.
Wow.
Meaning half of Americans, and now this is the thing I point out to people. Schedule the 1040 form 1040 instructions, the basic form everyone's got to look at before you even get to anything foreign. It's written to the 11th grade level. It's written. So why would a government write something that more than half its population can't understand? And additionally, when we talk about the trap that taxation is, this is what the government does. It makes your knowledge of the tax code a non-delegable duty, meaning that if you hire the best attorney, best CPA in the world, and he makes a mistake and you're like, oh, that's the greatest strategy, you're still ultimately on the hook. And that's what they did. That's what they're doing in Roger Ver. Because if you actually look at what his attorneys did, as I'm looking what I see, I'm like, they did everything right. I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like, oh my God, that could have been me. When I look at that, it's like, these guys did a pretty good job in trying to figure out how to do this. I was actually pretty impressed by how thorough they were. That right there would be evidence to say, well, look, I didn't intend to do anything. But and this is the other thing too, and this is where it gets even crazier. Just to understand the entire trap, how criminal this entire thing is. What the federal government does is they say, you know what, the attorney-client privilege doesn't apply to tax preparation. Why? Because that's mere tax preparation. But if you get it wrong, we'll put you in jail.
Right. You can't have it both ways, which is what they're trying to do.
Which
it
is
appears
what they,
you're right. So a part of this case, it actually went to the Supreme Court. They eventually dismissed the case and thus granted access Ver's communications with his advisors and lawyers to the IRS. So that case was settled though in 2023, early 2023. But there's so many issues, side issues related to this case to get into. I think this is really a lesson to everybody as well who's listening, that you want to make sure you document everything. Thank God Roger Ver had his emails from 2012, 2014, because it helps him tremendously.
And I would say this, he hired a good firm. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think maybe to zero in a little more here. This is not a tax case. This is a case of using the tax code to go after somebody.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how it needs to be viewed, because I think that, first of all, to the extent this is a tax case, most of it deals with sections that are unknown to almost everybody,
Mm-hmm.
understood by most, not understood by most of the people who even know about it, right? Et cetera. So it's very hard to see it as a tax case, really. And I think that that's a very, very important lesson for people. That when you have a piece of legislation that, by calling it the tax code, they essentially insulate it from scrutiny, that can then be used, and is in fact used, to go after anybody who they don't like. And I think that what's clear, we don't know exactly what the motivations were. I think that Mr. Tucker Carlson is giving them too much credit by saying that they fear this guy. I think they just don't like him.
It could be that, because he had an AC Cobra. So right, that really could be it. I do want to go, and this is where I want to pick up here and just sort of understand, because John, you're absolutely right. You guys, you're absolutely right. This is not a tax case.
Yeah.
This is about shutting someone up. That is what it's about. It is about shutting someone up, because this is the point you pace it. Your point is like, look, here's Roger, who's been harassed by the U.S. government because he dared speak out. He was like, look, he's like, what can I do here? All right, I'm going to renounce, because I don't know what they're going to do to me next. I have to renounce my citizenship because I am being targeted by the federal government. So I want, this retaliation. So he says, you know what? I really don't have the option. I got to renounce. This country is against me. And so so understand that when people's like, well, he renounced his citizenship, what does he deserve? I really can't stand that. No, people are forced to renounce their citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
They're forced.
I think that, actually, could you repeat that slowly? I think that's an extremely important point.
Yeah.
Anthony, that, look, let's get real here, okay? Nobody is renouncing U.S. citizenship because they wake up one day and say, I don't like, the Trump administration or the Biden administration. They're renouncing because, and only because, they see the U.S. government as a clear and present danger to their lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. And that is true, whether it's the most benign, 88-year-old woman living in Canada, to the Jason Bourne type, with 53 passports, flying around the world or whatever. That's why they renounce. Okay, the specifics may differ, but that's why they do it.
That exactly right. And under extreme stress, no one wants to do it. It's a very American thing. Your U.S. citizenship is a very American thing. Now, I want to just go over sort of the case that they built up over Roger. You have this next in your story here. Here you go. They charge him in the Central District of California, counts of mail fraud. Well, you have to mail your tax return in, right? So isn't that funny? Hey, oh, okay, we'll get great.
Right.
Two counts of tax evasion, 3 counts of making fraudulent or false statements. They're related to his filing of 2014-27 NRAs. His 2016 gift tax return, right? Even though he's no longer a U.S. person, but I guess he's a covered expat. And this 2014 exit tax return, his 8854. And now again, of course, right? If extradited, tried, and convicted, faces 109 years in prison, right? That seems about appropriate there, right? You tried your best to comply with our laws and hired a great firm, but we just want to get you. We just want to get you because we can't stand you. We can't stand you and your AC Cobra. We can't stand you and your Bitcoin. And by the way, Roger Ver could potentially be one of the richest men in the world right now. And he's not necessarily owned by the same people all the other wealthy people are. He's like, he could be a real threat there. I'm actually hoping Roger will sponsor a law school. That's where I'm hoping that John and I will be the faculty. That's where I'm hoping this goes. This is the case against the reason why this is what they jacked up against him. Now, I was clued into this. This was happening, I think, a year and a half ago when someone sent me the decision to say there was basically his law firm was trying to keep these things hidden, and they the courts plowed through the attorney-client privilege in this case, and someone said, hey, watch this. This is going to lead to something. I think I know who this is. And they were right. And that's what sort of had there. And so one thing I always want to say here is really hats off to Roger's law firm. When I look at what they did, They're, what they did, really did it. And I saw a lot of the things the questions that I would ask and the methodology that I would use. And, to get to the sense of the claim that Roger vastly understated his Bitcoin holdings is really what they're saying on his exit tax return, is that they created a totally false, history of how things actually were. I remember I was actually an early adopter of Bitcoin. Now I'm not really into it. I don't know. I got bored with it, but I was into it back when it came out, and I was telling people about it. I remember all my friends and clients in finance like, "Oh, that's a fad. No, we're never going to take that seriously." And it was really not seriously, because the only place you could really buy Bitcoin back in the day, 2013, was Mt. Gox, which people kind of don't pay attention to. It stood for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. That's a card game for people to play. So Bitcoin was as serious as a card game, collector card games. That's where you traded. Well, guess what? Mt. Gox had a huge problem. It crashed. And with it, the value of Bitcoin dropped precipitously at the time. So if Roger went to sell his Bitcoin on the market, he would have destroyed it. Bitcoin would have gone down to 10 cents. I really think so, because it was a very, very flimsy market at the time. So he's trying to value his Bitcoin under these circumstances where it's not traded. It's really not traded. It's not taken seriously. And now the government's kind of coming back. Well, of course, Bitcoin's a thing now, because it's now up to $123,000 or wherever it is today. Well, of course, Bitcoin's a thing right now. So that's sort of, what I find is they're using the fact that Bitcoin succeeded as the basis of you understood this. And I think that's a very dangerous thing here on the valuation. But I want to go to John, because John, what are some other problems? Because that's how they got him on it. But the whole exit tax, because there's an argument that the exit tax isn't constitutional.
Yeah, there's that too. Before we go there, I think that the argument on the valuation of Bitcoin is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. This is not about revisionist history, particularly if it's a criminal case, right? This is not about revisionist history. This is about, what people understood was going on at the time. Now, it would seem to me the only way I think they can possibly even move in the direction of winning on this is if they can prove that he misstated the quantity that he had. That's the only way they can do it. And I don't know anything about this, but I'm surprised they took this on. Okay, because there's a lot of legal theories that I'm not going to say they're necessarily weak, but they're not as strong as they should be, to start down the road of a criminal prosecution. But in any case, the issues, I think, and this was the original podcast we did on this, whenever that was over a year ago, I guess, at this point, right? But okay, so you've got the whole exit tax, right? That he underpaid the exit tax. The way that works is a deemed sale of whatever it is he owns. So there's that. That has valuation issues. That has issues of quantity. There is a gift tax return issue in there. He claims that he gifted some of his stuff away, and et cetera, et cetera. There also, though, is, at least my understanding of this, and by the way, I have no inside knowledge of this whatsoever. I'm just basing this on the stuff that's in the public domain. Was that he received distributions from his U.S. companies, okay, and that those should have been taxable, as even as a non-resident alien. If you receive distributions from U.S. companies, they're taxable. I mean, you see that's in the Internal Revenue Code. It's in the U.S. tax treaties. So that's all it is. Now, part of the defense on this thing, right, given that so much of this revolved around the exit tax, was, I think, quite properly, his lawyers raised the issue of the constitutionality of the exit tax, right? Now, what is an exit tax? Well, what it is, it's essentially the creation of fictitious income, meaning nobody ever received it, and saying, we're now going to include that fictitious income on your tax return, even though you never received it, and we expect you to pay a tax on it. Now, this is not a uniquely American thing. Okay, I mean, this is a trend sort of going around the world, but there is the constitutional issue of whether income, to tax something as income, does require realization, meaning the actual receipt of money to pay the tax, right? I mean, that's what we would mean there. And we spent a lot of hours, Anthony, talking about the Moore case. And of course, they got around that issue by saying, well, the Indian company did have income. There was income. Somebody had income somewhere in the world, so why don't we attribute it?
Right, there we go. Right. Yeah.
But here, this is entirely different. Okay. The exit tax is not the attribution of income from somebody else to you. The exit tax, the 877A, is saying, we are going to create income, pretend income out of thin air, and then attribute it to you. And in the Moore case, my reading of it is that 4 of the 9 judges actually ruled that if they'd had to decide whether realization was required, they assumed there was because the Indian company did receive the income. But 4 of the 9, 2 of the 9 said flat out, yes, okay, income requires realization. 2 more, Alito and Justice Barrett, strongly hinted that they would have ruled in that way. So, that's not bad, right? As a lawyer beginning to prepare a case, if you've got 4 out of 9 judges that are already inclined to say that the constitutionality of taxing income depends on your actually receiving income. And this is the basis for the constitutional takedown of this thing. And the consensus, I think, in the academic community and in the part of the legal profession that thinks about this stuff, is that this is a reasonable argument. And I think that this may provide strong incentives for the government to not proceed with this, because if they get a ruling that this exit tax is unconstitutional, that's going to be somewhere between highly, somewhat problematic and a big problem in trying to enforce that thing going forward, right?
That would get in the way of that.
Just a little bit, right? Yeah.
And Taylor, here's the part we have on basically what John was sort of left off of. I love the heroes earning assistance and relief tax.
I know the names of these bills are just so over the top, aren't they? I mean, it reminds me of the Patriot Act.
The Hard Act.
The Hard Act, right? These are truly Orwellian. Truly,
the Ministry of Love. The Ministry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, no, it cracks me up because I can't remember his name, but we did have at the repeal FATCA hearing back in 2017. I can't remember his name, but one of the people testifying had to renounce his U.S. citizenship. He was living in Switzerland and he couldn't get a mortgage otherwise. He was living there, and he was actually a U.S. vet, and he had his uniform up there. And he goes, yeah, no, I had to renounce my citizenship because of international taxation. Of course, so there it is, the government. And I guess this is George Bush, George Bush and the fine Bush administration.
No, let's be clear. I think we need to pause here for a minute, okay, about where this actually comes from. We need to be very, very clear. This proposal comes from the Clinton administration, Clinton, Clinton Treasury in 1995. You can actually find the hearings online, okay, and watch this. And, and there's 2. There's the congressional one, and there's the, and then there's Senate Finance. And in the congressional one, if I remember her name properly, it was chaired by somebody named Nancy Johnson. Okay, I think it was a congresswoman at the time, and there were serious questions raised as to whether this violated human rights, right? So you have these tax professors there as witnesses. No, of course it doesn't. And at that point, I realized that the tax academics are basically sociopaths. Okay, that they conveniently fail to understand what any of this stuff actually means in somebody's life, right? I mean, for them, this is just an ongoing journey of theory, et cetera. But no, this comes from the Clinton administration, along with the foreign trust rules, and about 80% of the horror that's going on today actually comes from Clinton Treasury.
That's so
yeah, and if I could just add on too, because there's one thing that also came from Clinton Treasury as well. I believe so, because Carl Levin was behind it, the big Democrat there. He was behind it. His minions were really, really big into this. One of his minions was Elise Bean, a law school professor at Wayne State University. She, Taylor, was the claimed author of FATCA. I have a video though. I was there. She had got 15 things wrong about FATCA and FBAR. I'm like this. So when I'm at the hearing, I'm getting yelled at because I'm freaking out while she's talking. I'm like, this woman is insane. She doesn't understand her own law. So then I started thinking, I'm like, she didn't write this thing. There's no way somebody could get so much basic things about their own law. I'm like, she didn't write this thing, but she claimed, well, I'm a law school professor. I'm a law school professor. Well, she did pass earlier this year. Now the truth comes out. The truth comes out that she was a congressional staffer for Carl Levin, something she hid. She hid that. She didn't say any of these things. And then you could see there's this whole long relationship between her and the government. And then Wayne State University got a huge grant. That is where you'll find the Carl Levin School of Law. That's where you explain it. So you have to understand that academia gets paid by academia is an asset of the government to lie to us and to launder bad ideas. Because like, okay, the government came up with this. Okay, we need something who came up. Oh yeah, at least you did it. Come here. Yeah. You're the author. You're the author of this. Oh yes, I'm the author.
Well, Anthony, interestingly, going back to the origins of the exit tax, they actually did hire a retired Harvard law professor, to write an expert opinion that, of course, the exit tax doesn't violate any human rights. I mean, you really can't make this stuff up. And then you talk about the Elise Bean thing. I mean, I think there's a clear disconnect between what these people think these laws say and what they actually say. Because if you were to look at the actual a text of the exit tax, they just shelved it, right, for a number of years. I think that they added in all the stuff, the pension confiscation stuff, right, at the end, et cetera. So we've got to be very, very careful with these people.
Now, I do want to go to another part of Taylor's story because I'm not, John. I looked at this and I didn't realize it at first, but now I'm looking at this again and I have a question about it here. Okay, so I'm highlighting this here. We're talking about Form 8854. What I tell my clients, hey, look, if you don't fill out this form, you're still considered a U.S. person for tax purposes, right? If you don't fill this, now what the IRS does is like, well, if you don't fill it out correctly, then you're a U.S. tax person, and so in this case. This is one I'm not aware of. Maybe either one of you would know the answer to this one. Are they proceeding? Is the government proceeding on the theory that today, that right now, Roger is a U.S. tax person? Are they proceeding on that theory to say, well, you're 8054? No, they're not. Okay, but they could.
No.
I don't think so. Good. This is definitely a John question.
Yeah. Okay. So Anthony, from 2004 to 2008, the failure to file an 8854 would have meant that you continued to be a U.S. tax resident, okay, from June 3rd, 2004 to June 16th, 2008. On June 16th, 2008, right, when the HART Act came into loving effect and view, basically what happened was that from the date of relinquishment, you cease to be a U.S. tax resident, irrespective of whether you file the 8854. That said, the failure to file the 8854 would be understood to make you a covered expatriate. Okay. Which,
okay.
May or may not cause problems. I mean, in Mr. Baer's case, he's obviously a covered expatriate. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of the issues that I think could have been part of the discussion generally are not part of the discussion because his covered expatriateness, if you will, is a done deal.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Now there's also some tax evasion charges in here as well for 2016, 2017. And I do recall looking at those. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. It looked a little suspicious to me there. That there's also some tax evasion, and I think it's all operating on kind of the fraud, the mistaken assumption that he lied on something. That's basically what it is.
That is correct. So I think you're talking about from 2017.
Yes, yes.
So, and either one of you, please come in if I am not describing this correctly, but I'm just going to go off of what I have here in the report, where I was very careful with my language to make sure it was correct. So from what I understand, so I have here, if you go to July 26th, August 14th, this is in 2018, we have this issue of distributions from VAERS companies which remained domiciled in the U.S. And I think that because of that, they were still considered U.S. persons. Even though VAER had expatriated, he was no longer a U.S. citizen. His company still remained in the U.S., so he would owe tax on any distributions or dividends from those companies. However, it does appear perhaps that the lawyer or one of his advisors, return preparer one, may have given him incorrect information. Irregardless of that, I mean, nobody is required to correct advice from their tax lawyers. That is mentioned in the motion to dismiss. But basically here, and I'm pulling up the email.
Yeah, is this the one right here that I got up?
They would be non-taxable. So the distributions would be non-taxable to VAER because they are considered sales of intangible personal property, which are sourced to the residents of the seller. Because you are a non-resident of the U.S., this would be foreign source income, and it would not be reportable on your U.S. tax return.
Okay.
That may have been not 100% correct information. However, as I mentioned earlier, from what I understand, individuals are permitted to rely on the advice given to them by their tax advisors. They're not required to challenge it. That was from Supreme Court case U.S. versus Boyle.
Thank you, Taylor. Yeah, and I do believe that, and I do recall. Yeah, I think you sent me the email where I'm like, yeah, that might not have been the right advice there. And does look like. But here's the thing: where's the evidence that he intended? Where's the invention? Where's any evidence of intent? Tax mistakes happen all the time. Trust me, all the time. It's very rare for a tax mistake to result in a criminal prosecution. What you do is you send people a bill. That's what you do. Like, oh, you're actually wrong. So here's your bill plus your penalties and plus. That's typically what we see. But in this case, they were looking for something. And again, but the problem, and the problem is you're right. You are able to rely on the advice from your attorney to prove that, look, I didn't try to do anything wrong. You still will be civilly on the hook. You cannot do that. You're still civilly on the hook. But as far as going to prove a criminal intent, you got a pretty good solid argument there. Like, no, I would have done what I paid. I was looking for advice. They told me I'm fine. I understand their interpretation may have been correct, but where's the evidence of criminal wrongdoing? And it's not there. And that's why we kind of know this is lawfare.
Right.
Every which way.
I think that, to break this down and slice and dice a little more clearly, right? This is in the context, Anthony, you're absolutely right, in the context of a criminal case. And, it's fairly obvious from that email, and maybe there are others, okay, that, he is relying on the information that he has from his tax preparers. And so it's very hard, I think that makes it very difficult to make a case that he has, the intention to evade taxes or whatever. That's the first thing. The second thing, you talk about the Boyle case, Taylor. My recollection of that is that it's essentially a reasonable cause case that says that, if you're acting in a business-like way, et cetera, and if you rely on advice from a certain kind of attorney, right? If you've decided that this is somebody, who understands this stuff. So I think that that's highly relevant to an issue of penalty, right? And reasonable cause, et cetera. Now, the third issue is what's really going on. And, that email from the tax preparer is extremely confused, right? Because it fails to distinguish between a distribution from the company and the sale, the sale, right, of an asset. Now, as a non-resident alien, if it were capital gain, he wouldn't be subject to U.S. taxation. But if it's a distribution, which it appears to have been, but again, I have no more information than you do or anybody else, right? then it would have been taxable income to him, right? Presumably on the basis of the default 30%. If he lives in a tax treaty country, then something less. But, this stuff is like light years away. It's a different galaxy from criminal issues.
Right. And the U.S. government is claiming that he just lied to Return Prepare One. They actually withheld those communications, which show that, in fact, Return Prepare One may have given incorrect advice on this matter, completely omitted from the indictment. They just say that Theil lied. And in fact, from what I've heard, although I don't get into the details on this in the report, it appears as if there may be some sort of investigation going on in Spain because the U.S. government allowed the Spanish prosecutor to deceive on this particular issue and did not present to the court that specific email exchange from Exhibit 14. However, I don't have the details on that. This is what I've heard from people who, or I think it's actually in one of the court documents. And then I've also heard a few other experts touch on this very, very briefly, but I didn't make it a part of the report at all.
Yeah, what's interesting here? Listening to what's the name of that guy, Anthony? We did a podcast on him. That contractor to the U.S. Army who
Doug Edelman.
Edelman, yeah. This actually is very, very similar to the Edelman case.
Yeah.
I think in the respect that the claim of the U.S. government and Edelman. Okay, as I understand it, was that he was, it wasn't so much that the advice that he was getting on the facts was wrong, but that he had, given improper facts, right, to generate that advice. And, the way you put that, Taylor, I mean, it sounds to me as though part of what the U.S. government is trying to claim here is that we don't really care what the advice was given because our view is that he constructed the facts that he wanted, to generate, now that may be what their claim is, but boy, this is not easy stuff to prove. Okay. And, then you add all these other things in here. And then we have the fact that, this has now been going on. We have another continuance till October sometime?
October 20th. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth time this year that the motion to dismiss has been fifth. Yeah. That it's been continued. I understand. I think it's in my report that there was a change of attorney somewhat recently this year. So maybe that could account for it. But I've never seen this happen before. But again, I'm not a legal expert.
Well, it seems fairly obvious. Okay. I mean, these are joint requests, right, for these continuances.
They are. Yes. Both parties requested this additional time.
It's fairly obvious that the government lawyers cannot be too hot to trot, to get this thing moving, right?
Well, that's kind of where I'm at here because as I'm looking at Taylor's report here, on April 7, 2025, U.S. Deputy Attorney General issues a memorandum.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, look, the Department of Justice is not a digital assets regulator. However, the prior administrator used the Department of Justice to pursue a reckless strategy of regulation by prosecution, which was ill-conceived. There should be a hyphen there, by the way, and poorly executed. The Justice Department will no longer pursue litigation or enforcement actions that have the effect of superimposing regulatory frameworks on digital assets, while President Trump's actual regulators do this work outside punitive criminal justice framework. So, well, that sounds helpful. So maybe we need to, and I guess this might be a good point to say, hey, look, why is this so important? Why is it so important that this billionaire be free? And
why is it important?
Why is it important? Well, I'm going to tell you why it's important. Because really, how else is the government going to terrorize you? Because what the government can't do is it can't be overt in how it terrorizes you. It must be hidden. If it's overt, then we know what our enemy is. But rather, the government must exist by deception. The deception exists in the tax code, which people are trained to just abdicate all knowledge of as something unknowable, which to a degree can be. It can be unknowable. But that is why things are hidden. Your tyranny is it's hidden in the tax code. There are so many things that we go by and we don't even question. The fact that it depends, your tax rate depends on your age, your marital status, where you were born. There are so many things that violate the basic things of what we're talked about, equal protection under the law. We never look at the examples of how much the government has lied to us repeatedly again and again. And when they're caught in a lie, they just make up a new lie to distract us from their old lie. That is the pattern that we have. This, and the government would not have the command and control it would have without the IRS. It's made intentionally complex so that we're overruled by a tyranny we can never quite understand. And the challenge in the jurisdiction is taken away so that people can't even challenge this tyranny. Look, just trying to challenge a tax case, you're limited to tax court, which isn't a real court. It's not a real court in any sort of way. You're stuck with going to federal court, which is incredibly expensive, incredibly time consuming. And often you have to pay the full tax bill and then claim a refund. So the government sets it up so you can never quite challenge this, never quite know it, never quite get the real advice, never quite be protected, because the entire purpose of the federal of the tax code is control. Raising revenue has nothing to do with it. And by the way, I happen to know this for a fact. The truly wealthy billionaires, the ones that are connected, the ones unlike Roger, the ones that are in the news and doing a lot of things that probably would get this channel censored if I mentioned them, they don't have to pay taxes. I know from personal experience, two of these terrible families, whistleblower complaints were filed on both of them. I looked at the whistleblower complaints. Fantastic. They should have resulted in criminal prosecution. But the IRS whistleblower protection program actually exists to collect and make sure that any evidence against the politically power is embargoed. It's inventoried, warehoused, so that they can do their tax evasion and never have to worry about anything. Hunter Biden was not the only one protected by the IRS whistleblower program. The entire thing is designed to protect them. That is the point we need to do. So what I would say is if we can't free Roger, we are imprisoning ourselves. This is the time. This is the time to say, you know what? People should have the right to criticize the government. They should have the right to live free and peaceably. They should have the right for clarity. We have a taxpayer bill of rights that promises all these things. By the way, it's not operative. Oh yeah, here's your taxpayer bill of rights. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. There's no teeth to it. The number one tyranny we have in this country is through the tax regime, and it's designed to keep us humiliated, degraded, feeling awful about ourselves. We're forced into bad decisions and oftentimes into more debt decisions. So really, when I look at the job of Congress, their job of Congress is to sell the most amount of Federal Reserve debt to the American people while claiming they're not. That is the job, to further enslave us in their debt slavery system, that if you object against it, we're going to punish you and we'll put you away for 110 years for your thought crime of challenging us. So that's, in my mind, why it's utterly important we do this, because it is not about revenue in this case. This is about your freedom. This is the government being exposed for what it is. And really what we have is just the vindictiveness of the government. This is the government as a criminal cartel. This is a criminal cartel doing this. It's nothing else other than that. So
why do you think? Okay, I mean, I think a few listeners, if there's still,
oh no, we got a lot of people
disagree.
No, we're doing great.
No, I mean, few would disagree with what you're saying, but I'd like to ask the two of you a very specific question: why go after Roger? What is, I mean?
Oh yeah, right.
If you wanted a drive-by shooting, I don't think that many people really would identify. I mean, they might fantasize about being him, they might admire him, but I don't think they would relate to him all that much, right? So I'm trying to understand. I mean, assuming that a big part of the purpose here is some kind of drive-by shooting, a friendly bulletin from the U.S. government, right? Why him? Especially given I mean, this is not an easy case, okay?
I mean, when I look at it, I did wonder, do they even want to take this to trial? Was this ever intended to go to trial? Because the case is so flimsy. They have had to engage in my opinion, quite a bit of misconduct to even get this case taken up by a grand jury to get an indictment in the first place. So I do wonder what the intention is. I didn't get into that in the report. However, and again, I'm not a crypto enthusiast. I don't know much about Bitcoin at all. And I didn't focus on the report either. But, the U.S. has now created this strategic Bitcoin reserve. Could it be, and I don't know if this makes any sense, could it be that this is a way to seize Bitcoin assets from someone who has a lot of Bitcoin and then bring it over to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. I have no idea, because there are other similar cases to Roger Ver that are ongoing right now. That's one possibility. It could be also to send a message to tax lawyers, to people who have a large amount of wealth. It could also be to deter people from expatriating. I do think they don't want wealthy people expatriating, because to me, and this of course is John's area, but from my perspective as a layperson, it seems that they have made the process more difficult, more cumbersome, more tedious. They don't want people going that route. So there are many questions as to why they are choosing to prosecute him. Throughout his entire adult life, since 2000, he has been a target of the state, repeated IRS audits. He had that explosives case as well, which I think has made his life quite difficult. He has spoken about this briefly in previous interviews. I mean, he has a felony charge. It makes it hard to get work, hard to travel, get visas, things like that. So clearly a target of the state. Could be a mixture of a variety of reasons of why they're targeting him. But I think, to bring it back to a point that both you have addressed, which is very important for people to remember, this, of course, is not really about taxes. It's not really about that money, perhaps. And it was Catherine Austin Fitts who said, with regard to this case and some others, is that the fight in official reality is often not the fight in reality. So the official reality is this tax case, but in reality, they are targeting him for some other reason, and we don't know. Who knows if we will ever know? But I guess as this case progresses, we can see what the real intent of the U.S. government is here.
I don't know that we'll ever see the intent, but I think there's some things that we cannot say too many times, and so this is not about taxes.
Sure.
This is what I would say is that, I think the IRS the criminal process is quite misunderstood by people. The IRS doesn't care about collecting anything like that. The entire purpose of the criminal process is to rule by fear and intimidation. Here's some facts. In 2022, there were only 690 indictments for pure tax evasion. And if you actually look at the IRS criminal investigation handbook, the last thing they actually mention is taxes. They're talking about all the bad guys are taken down for all other sorts of reasons, but they never might not quite get the taxes. Because here's the problem. Taxes are very unpopular. They're very unpopular. People don't like them. So when the IRS prosecutes, they want the person convicted for the things that they didn't do, but really for who they are. And by the way, this started very early. Al Capone, guess what? No, he did try to pay his taxes. The government lied about that. They set him up for it. He said, yeah, no, there's a letter from his attorney. He said, Al did make some money. Here's what he thinks this is what he thinks he has for his adjusted gross income. And the attorney was probably telling the truth, because Al Capone was a problem gambler. He didn't make all that much money. So, railroading people. So Al Capone was convicted. Why? Because he's a threat to the Secretary of Treasury, Andrew Mellon. That's why he personally didn't like him. So that's how they use the lawfare to take out Al Capone. So this is just a continuation of government resources being used to take out political enemies, ruling by fear and intimidation. Because let me tell you something, it is impacting people that I talk to about renouncing. It does. I have a bunch of crypto guys. I'm talking to them right now about renouncing, and they're like, am I big enough as Roger? And that's really the thing. See, the government can't get everyone. They got to go for the biggest guy. If you go for Roger, you're going after a lot more than just him. It's fear and intimidation and ruling by this tyranny that you may be selected, not because you actually did something wrong, but because of who you are. That's exactly what this criminal government is. And it uses its tax code in very bizarre ways. And really since the beginning, to punish people it doesn't like, including 1791. Now with that, we are up in time. I see we have a bunch of questions. So let's see if we can get to some questions here. Thank you so much. Hey, we got some, all right, let's hear. Good morning to you. I don't think I'll be able to meet that later today. I do want to be on your space later today. That's going to be a fun one. Here you go. Right, here it is. This is Sherry. Exactly. Right. And actually Al Capone, he might not have been like who he said, who he claimed to be, but exactly. He was ultimately convicted of income tax evasion when he didn't even intend to do it, because they set him up. And that's really where it goes to.
So look,
Oh, I was just going to mention something else about VARE quickly, too. And this has been stated by Tracy Thurman, who's a legal advocate on the case. VARE has been quietly funding and contributing quite a bit to various dissident pro-freedom groups during the COVID era, as well as various other causes involving lawfare against Ross Ulbricht and many others. He funds various organizations that are pro-freedom, pro-civil liberties, and this could have been very irritating to the U.S. government as well. So instead of him being able to help with these various humanitarian causes, he's now bogged down, focused on this legal case. So that could be another element to it. When I heard that information, I thought that was quite interesting and could be another potential motive.
Do either of you think that the U.S. government is anti-freedom?
That's its job. That's its top job.
You think so?
Yeah, and that's its number one job is to do that. Oh, by the way, Sherry's got another one that Sherry, this is another one. I actually looked into this case too. Leona Helmsley. She was quoted, "Oh, we don't pay taxes, only the little people pay taxes." That was an invented quote. She never said that. She may not have done anything that they claim to do. They set her up like Martha Stewart. If you don't do the right thing, they're going to come and invent something against you. So you got to remember, when someone is indicted by the federal government, that's a great sign that they're a good person. That's a fantastic sign. Oh, wow, they must be a really good person, because that is who the government goes after the most, are good people. That's who the government assassinates the most. This government has a habit of doing that as well. The really good people. That's a great way to know. Hey, was that a good person or not? Well, JFK was killed by the CIA. Yeah, no, I'm going to say JFK was a good guy. I'm going to say that just because I don't need to know anything else about him, but I know about his enemies. I think that's where we are. So there's just so much going on here. Now, Andrew's got a question here, and I think this is something important. If a tax preparer is wrong, can the person hold them responsible? Well, it's very difficult. This is what's hilarious about it, that ultimately you as the taxpayer are on the hook for whatever your tax preparer did. And we had this one case, and this was a pretty good example of how obnoxious it was. It was the person didn't report a foreign bank account on their FBAR, which is another lie. I mean, there's actually no authorization for that. John and I have talked about that. Again, this entire penalty regime is illegal. The FBAR has no actually statutory authorization. Regardless, the IRS is looking to penalize them. And so we're like, well, look, they had reasonable cause. They reached out to an attorney in Switzerland, and this attorney in Switzerland, look, the email says he doesn't need to do that. And like, well, that's not good enough. Well, I said, well, the person reached out to their sister, who was a securities attorney in Boston, and said, oh, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. You're all fine. The person then reached out to a third person who said, oh, you're fine. And then like they reached out to us, and they're like, oh, no, you actually need to file an FBAR. The IRS refused to accept the fact that the person reached out to 3 people for advice. They said, well, you should have reached out to the person with the right advice.
Oh.
That's really what they do. They're, oh, you should have known enough that they weren't telling you the truth. It's like, but this tax code is it's 3 million pages long, and it's supported by regulations, codes, instructions, private letter rulings, notices. It's overwritten by so many things. There's no there's no one in the world who can understand the IRS. No one in the world does. So that's the unfortunate thing. And again, why is it set up this way? It's set up this way to terrorize us, to keep us always on the defense, to always like, oh my God, there's an IRS letter, and freak out when we see that IRS letter. Okay, now, yeah, I'm a loser. And I have all my clients internalizing this stuff. I'm a moral failure because I got a letter from the IRS. Like, no. It's the government. That's the problems, I would say, for that.
Mm-hmm.
So now I do want to say is that, oh my God. Oh, wait. Oh, Sherry's always got the inside scoop. All right. So she was stealing from the bank. All right. Well, that's what you're saying. I'm not saying that. Martha Stewart might have a different thing. Oh, well, there it is. Oh, okay. So that all right. Wait, fine. I got a great audience. We got a great audience here. It's wonderful. All right. So we're near the end of our show here. So I guess this is the thing. What are our action steps for those of us who are interested in helping out this case, those of us who see it? John, I'll go with you. What do you think our action steps are here? Like, hey, look, you're enraged by this. What should you do?
Well, I think that it would be very, very helpful if there was, and I know these things exist. Taylor would be up on this, I'm sure, but I think there needs to be a massive a protest against this type of thing. Based on this is not about taxation at all. This is, if they can do this to Roger, they can do this to you. And that's, in fact, the message that they're trying to, convey, something like maybe a No Kings demonstration or something. But one of the problems with these kinds of things, right, is that the average person, I think, finds this stuff somewhat interesting, but doesn't really think that it has any applicability to their life, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But what people need to understand is that there is not a single American citizen anywhere in the world that isn't in violation of all kinds of laws at any moment. It is simply impossible, okay? And what we're into is a world where, it's what, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. I mean, this is tyranny in the extreme. And this should be used, I think, to crystallize and purposefulize, if that's a word, a movement to get rid of the income tax and replace it with something else. Because as long as the income tax exists, no American is safe. Mm. And that's the message that I think needs to, and again, I'm going to repeat, I am not some kind of anti-tax guy at all, okay? I'm not saying I like taxes, I don't, but I'm not, in principle, one of these, taxes or theft type of people. I just don't really believe that. But what I do believe is that the Internal Revenue Code and the Income Tax Act of Canada, let's not, pin all this on the United States, okay, have evolved to the point that they are a serious threat.
Top threat.
I think the top threat to freedom going forward. I mean, what this is about fundamentally is this guy not providing, both of these extraditions, right, were about, false information on some kind of an information return. I mean, that's where this has gotten. So this needs to be converted from an idea of did he or did he not pay his taxes, mm-hmm. Okay, which is the way most people probably view this, to, oh my God, we have to get rid of the income tax so that all Americans are free from this. And I think that the Vair case provides a unique opportunity for that.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, no, and John, and John and I were discussing in that the Irish Medic channel, if you're joining us, that we were discussing that, right before the show, John's like, Anthony, I think the only solution here going forward is to eliminate the income tax. And here's why. Because it's sort of ridiculous that, in theory, the federal government is supposed to have limited power, only limited power, and all other powers are reserved to the states and the people, right, in theory. But it's like you have a problem. You can have an income tax or a limited government. Pick one. You can't have both. You cannot have a limited government and an income tax, because with it, income tax become all the inherent practicalities of enforcing it, which require the total abdication of the Bill of Rights and all common law rights. That's the problem.
Hey, that is extremely complex and intellectual. How about asking a very simple question? Do you want a world with the Internal Revenue Code or a world with a free society?
There you go.
You can't have both. That's it. And that is very, very clear. If for no other reason, but that people can't even understand the laws that apply to them.
Right.
I mean, this is completely out of hand. And, I think that it's funny because, we're doing what everybody does is, we see this guy and we get into the, this, that, and the other thing and what's really going on tax wise. But I think that to a large extent, Taylor's written this fantastic article.
Incredible.
I mean, all this work that went into
I know.
it. This is one for the ages. Congratulations on your
Thank
great
you.
work.
Yeah,
I think, Taylor, you need a part 2.
I know.
Okay.
I think you're here. Yeah. Yeah. So Taylor, how would you say, what would you say the action, you want people to take to say, hey, look, you think this is so important. You wrote an incredible article. I mean, this is really, really good. And you did a lot of work on this. So it means something to you. So what do you think people should do? What action?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for that. And the reason that it is so thorough, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on a program with both of you, you guys, for the people listening, watching, I consulted with both of these gentlemen, spoke with them both for several hours, honestly, and they helped me understand this because I am not even a financial reporter. Really, I do cover legal cases, but never anything this complex having to do with the tax system, with crypto, with the financial aspects of life. Really, I've never covered this before, so both of these guys were tremendously informative to really make this a thorough and accurate assessment of what's going on in the Ver case. So I thank them for that, and I've learned so much, and I hope that people will read this and learn more about it. So that would be a first step, not to promote my, shamelessly promote the article, but seriously, familiarize yourself. You will be shocked. Maybe some of you won't be too shocked, but you will see just how the US government has lied on this indictment, how the tax system works, how there's these seemingly, arbitrary exceptions for certain individuals based on their, life circumstances with regard to their taxation, their ability to expatriate from the United States. All of that's in there. And so I would encourage people to get informed, talk to your friends, family members, neighbors about this case if it's safe to do so. We live in a highly politicized world where people can't handle differing views, but spread the word, talk about it. If you go to freerogernow.org, I know there is a petition. You could sign the petition. And then while this may seem sort of like a hopeless task, I would still encourage people to politely reach out to the president, encourage a pardon, or just to drop the case, really. I mean, you don't need a pardon. The case should be dropped because of that April 7th memorandum. So politely, kindly, I want to emphasize that, of course, encourage the president on social media. You'll probably have to go on Truth Social because I don't think he's too active on X, far more active on Truth Social probably, but kindly encourage the Department of Justice to drop the case. So I would encourage people to do that. And then John mentioned about a second report. And look, this report is quite lengthy. There is actually so much more that I could have gotten into. I did not even touch on the intricate reasons as to why the defense is arguing that the exit tax is unconstitutional. I didn't even get into that yet. I figured I would maybe dive into that for a part 2 if I was up for it, or at least,
you got some, there's some demand for it there. I got to say, I think there's some demand.
Yeah,
well, Taylor, I really think you ought to do it. I mean, I don't know, what your view is of yourself, and I don't know you particularly, but I mean, you've done some great work, and there are a few people around who, really do any great work or do any work at all for that matter. And I would really encourage you, to see this as the beginning, to expand this into, you ask about these movements. I mean, to some extent, I think this can be built around these kinds of articles. And this is, as I say, this has nothing to do with Roger. This has everything to do with, do you want the income tax as it's constituted, or do you want a free society? That's your choice. And that should be, the question for candidates running in 2026, whatever. I just want to ask you a simple question. And if you want a free society, you vote this way, okay? Because this is totally out of control. This is a nonpartisan thing, okay? And, we talk about Al Capone. Good God, I mean, the Income Tax Act and Al Capone's have, nothing to do with anything. Now it's reached the point where there's not a person on the planet who's in full compliance with this thing, right?
No,
and that's why, the buzzword is defensible compliance. I mean, nobody can know. The only way that somebody can be compliant with the U.S. tax system is, one, objectively to not be required to file a return because their income is, and not be dumb enough to file it anyway. Okay? That's the only way.
Well, and I would just say, Taylor, I mean, I got to thank you so much because it's so hard. John and I, John, Keith and I, when we're getting together, it's so hard to get traction on this stuff. It's the most fundamental things people know, and it's the most ignored thing all the time. So your passion, your energy into exposing this could be really the difference maker. I really want you to know that you really might be onto something here. And I just can't thank you enough for what you've done here, your thoroughness and your willingness to even ask people who may be hostile, like the ATF agent who, is not a fan of Roger. So really, just tremendous work. So I think that's something. So I think part 2 would be helpful. And also what I would suggest for people is, if you are on Twitter, to follow Taylor. Here she is right there, _ at Taylor Hudak. Okay. And then also John, John is at Expatriation Law. And then myself, on X at IRS Medic. You find one of us, you probably find all of us. And also you can each email me directly. I get a lot of inside tips. I love my emails. So please, anyone out there, feel free to reach out, send me an email, tell me what's going on in perspective in a story. Also, if anyone else there, I'm kind of curious, did any other attorneys get retaliation for Waco? I'm kind of curious, because I'm like, okay, I haven't heard one. I'm sure there's more than one. So that's one of the things that I would have. And I think lastly, I think my call to action to Roger would be, again, I think that law school that John and I will be found. It would be a great idea to really teach people.
The Anthony Parent School of Law.
I think we really could, and I'm actually pretty serious, because I think we could do it. And one of our, one of somebody who's really been helpful, a great member of our audience, is Andrew Prune. He has been incredible to me. He's someone who just sort of harassed me on X with various questions, and then I realized where he was going. He's someone who's really big into the common law that has been overwritten by statutes and rules. What we need to get back to, what the law needs to get back to, is the law of the land, the highest law of the land. It's not the statutes. It's actually not the constitutions. I wish that my law school experience, even though I took some great electives, I wish the law school curriculum was a little bit different, a little less statute, a little bit less regulations, more on the common law and the wisdom that it had. Look, the common law, it was established to create good decisions. Statutes are designed to fulfill political wills. That's the difference, and that's really where I would love to get that. Andrew volunteered to be the janitor at our law school, so we just need a little funding to get us started. All right, so that's all we need.
So let me ask the two of you a question before I lose my power here. All of this is great, but do you think Americans really want to be free, or would the thought upset them too much? What do you think, Anthony?
Most people want to be told what to do.
Taylor?
They need to be told they need freedom. Yeah.
That's a hard question.
Do you think that it takes courage to be free?
Yes, I do. I do. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I think that's an important point here.
All right. Well, yeah. So I guess there's our call to action. We all need to have the courage to be free.
Yes.
Perfectly said. Well, again,
necessary, but not a sufficient condition. I'm going to lose my power here, so I'm going to have to say.
All right, we'll sign off. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank Taylor and I want to thank John so much for this. I am Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and John and I will be discussing about why the tax code does need to go away. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything.
Oh, we don't need that much discussion, Anthony.
Yeah,
it's a very, very bad thing, and
it's a very, very bad thing. And we're hoping Taylor gets a part 2, and we'll have her on again. And hopefully, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Part 3. In fact, 200 years from now, now we read Blackstone. People will be reading Taylor.
There we go. Beautiful. Oh. Thank you so much, guys. All right. Well, thank you. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Till next time. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.